Advisory School District's second annual retreat. We'll convene at 6:03. We have one item on the agenda. We will be taking no actions. I don't believe we need an executive session. And we will be primarily working, and at the end of the session, or maybe at the end of sections of the session, we'll ask for public comment as well. So thank you for coming. This is a little unusual to be doing a retreat in this format, so it's going to seem a lot like our regular meetings. We'll have to take turns and mute and unmute as usual. I'd also ask board members to, if it's quiet in your house, you can remain unmuted, but please pay attention to that and use the blue flags in the bottom of the participants column to, if you wish to speak. Hopefully we won't have to do too much of that. If we wind up with big waiting lines, then we'll figure something out. But we'll make sure that everybody has plenty of opportunities to participate. The format is really unformed. Andy and I spoke a couple of times about what to do and how to do it. And we initially thought about a facilitator and doing some really engaging activities, but that seems much less likely to be productive in this context. So we sort of settled on trying to get clarity, and I'm going to ask Andy to explain this a little bit more fully because I think he has a better sense of it. But to try and get clarity on what kinds of things we want to be sure we're talking about, what kinds of things we want to be sure we're focused on, what kind of things we want to make sure get done, and to really get them on the calendar so we know that we're going to get to them and we know when we're going to get to them. So I'm going to ask Andy to expand on that a little bit if he'd like, and then we'll just have a look at some of the things that are before us and then just start pretty much an open conversation, I think, about what we should be doing and when, and how we've been doing so far, although the responses the feeling seems to be that our process is working fairly well. We need more communication, but we'll certainly talk about that. So Andy, would you like to add a little bit to what we're going to try and accomplish tonight, please?
Sure. And I'm glad I realized my speakers were on mute as I saw the group and realized, oh, that I had muted the button earlier today and forgot to turn it off. So I did catch most of what you said.
Oh, good.
So Dave and I talked about identifying, one, kind of building what are the goals for the board, and starting with our, the overarching goals as an initial framework, and then mapping backwards, what do we want to see to allow us to measure those goals. And then from those goals, we would look at a schedule throughout the course of the year that would allow us to, one, provide the boards its level of accountability and examination of what the school district is doing, but do so in a manner that we can be planful for as well. We also talked about maybe setting a calendar for more information that the board would like to hear about and doing it over the course of the year. So for instance, the board might want to learn more about social emotional learning because that's going to be a big thrust as the opening of schools, and that could be part of an ongoing presentation throughout each month. We could have a distinct theme that we could look into and identify what are the things that the board would like to know that are taking place within the schools. So when you have that grocery store conversation when you're in line and someone says, hey, tell me about this social emotional learning program that's going on, or tell me about special education or the literacy work that the schools are doing, that there's an informed ability to do so. And we could look at the calendar to identify what are those days, what are those topics you'd like to see every month. And then we could work with our staff to figure out what those would look like, and then allow us to facilitate a conversation once a month to the board as kind of an informational purpose. Did I capture all that, David?
I hope so. I just added something to the list of things to look at. So I think maybe instead of a big brainstorm, let me show you share the screen here and show you the things that we have come up with so far, some of these are the top part of the list is kind of bullet points that are also addressed in the response to the questions. But the first section here is copied right out of the handbook from the School Boards Association. What's important for us to measure, and how do we most effectively measure what's important, and talk about what we do now and how we do it. I think we're probably going to skip over this part and review, because I think we really don't have much of a sense of what it is we do measure. So that's part of what we have to clarify and prioritize. So one of the things that's come up since we've got I think all of the leadership councils established, is that they are all very different. They're operating differently. Some seem to have had a fairly close look at the policy and the policy goals, and some seem not to. So that's something that we're going to need to get on an agenda. This hiring and a number of other things around our commitment, our 8-point commitment to anti-racism and social justice will come up in a number of ways, a number of times. So I'm not going to detail this. Immediate actions, report on immediate actions. This is something that came up when it looks like we're going to get compensated for a lot of the 1% funding that we spent this summer. We may be able to use some of that the board can commit that. The contract allows the board to also propose projects, and we could commit that to some levels of anti-bias training. These are our policy reports that are in. These are all. This is the reference to the policy, and these are all areas where we are by policy required to receive an annual report on administrative performance, on school community relations, on parent involvement, on curriculum, at least an evaluation of how it's going, and a report on it, and supervision and evaluation. Once again, report and this is actually the system of supervision and evaluation, not specific supervising, not specific evaluations. How is the system working? Reporting how the effectiveness, and then recommendations for improvements or changes. Social emotional, I just typed in. These are other things that just came up: special ed statute and structure. There's the legislature recently adopted I can't think of the acronym, but it's a pretty comprehensive description of what special ed should be. I think we should get a solid presentation on that from our special ed leadership and staff, and I would think parents as well. A look at the Windham Regional Career Center statute. How is that supposed to be functioning? How is it functioning? What are the programs? What are the results been? These are things we just don't hear about in the day-to-day or the month-to-month of the board. The budget process itself, there are many, many steps. It starts early, and Frank is really very, very capable of helping people understand the complexity of that process, and also how our budget feeds into the ed funding process. And I think that's something that's valuable to, even after years. There's lots of that are still really hard to understand. Open meeting law is another one. Windham Northeast recently had an attorney we use often, Pietro Lynn, but did a remote open meeting law session with them, and they said it was terrific. Quarterly fiscal updates are not things that we have had in the past, but I think it would make sense for us to see quarterly, how are we doing compared to budget, if we're running way behind or way ahead on our spending. What accounts for it. There's always something accounts for it, but I think it'd be useful for us to recognize how that unfolds over the course of the year, how our money goes out. And then biweekly administrative reports. This is something that the Brattleboro Town Board started several years ago and refined to a certain degree, but we never really, it didn't transition well to the merged board, and the PPEC, the Programmatic and Performance Equity Committee, has talked about this, but we haven't really been able to get very far on it. So that's something we're going to need to look at. And then these are the responses that I received as of last night. when I was last able to work on them, and early this morning. And what I did was, well, I'll just run through the whole thing. The reflections, I think, we can spend a little bit of time talking about our process this year. Most of the reflections, as you can see, it's going pretty well. The communication is good, transparency seems to be good, and we're working, and we seem to be growing and working well as a unit. There was let's see. Oh, there was something that someone thought would be helpful in terms of how we're functioning, and that was that we heard more ideas and opinions from the members. Although there seems to be an effort, there is an effort to make sure everybody participates. Some members would like to hear more from all of us. The active committee seemed to be improving the information that we have to address issues and solutions. The tone of the meeting, the consent agenda saves time. Zoom, this is something that we're going to want to think about when we get to, if we ever get to meeting in person again, is how do we continue to be able to have people join us electronically, even if we are meeting in open session in public? Because there are people that come to these meetings that cannot come at dinner time with 3 kids, just not possible. And this has really allowed a lot of people to participate. And then again, it would be helpful, or I guess it's been helpful that meetings stay on track and everyone participate, or it would be. I'm not sure if that means we do or that means we should. But I don't know if we need to, let me go through the rest of these and then we can decide whether we want to talk about how our process has been so far and reflect on the year. We probably want to talk a little bit about that, but nothing jumped out as needing addressing from the responses that I received. Then under improvement, these all seem to be in the same conceptual area, which is communication. We need to track issues so they don't fall off the agenda. That has happened. They don't necessarily fall off, but we don't hear about it for a long time. It's just a 2-sentence update would be just a habit of updating things. A shared folder online for correspondence so people can see things as they come in and can also see how, if a board member gets a letter and they share it on that folder and the rest of the board sees it and the chair or the superintendent responds to it, you'll be able to see if it or doesn't respond to it. You'll be able to see and see that we are responding to communication and correspondence. Consistent data reports, that goes, I think, is similar to the biweekly administrative reports. And then more input and opinions from members. This is actually the one, create a climate that welcomes dissenting opinions. This is actually an improvement. That's where the improvement was on how the meetings are going. And then this other communication is information flow, particularly to the vice chair and to board members, so that if I'm not around for some reason, people can have a meeting without me. Or and it's just that information is getting out to people. Because I don't think there is a lot that I don't forward on to the board, but I think just having a system and a structure and an understanding of what should happen there, I think is a good idea. So we need to talk about communications. The big stuff, again, broke into a couple of concepts or broad areas. Assessing impact just goes right over to measures because that's what we're talking about. How are our decisions? What are they resulting in? Are they helping? Keeping sight of larger goals, that was really explicit also in the measure, down here in terms of remembering things like sports and drama and trips and music and art and foreign travel and all of the things that happen. How do we get those back? Start to think about how can we operate those at some level. But then the equity and diversity, anti-racist issues comes along, green climate, and there were some specifics around that. But the climate crisis task force work. The leadership councils came up again, reviewing curriculum and reflecting on our mission and our partnerships. Who are we working with and how do we facilitate not just our formal partnerships like the preschools, but partnerships in anything else that we undertake. So those seem to be the big issues, and leadership councils is a broad one, and then equity and diversity and the anti-racist agenda. And then the measures, let's see. Measuring the data on implementing the commitment. to social justice and anti-racism. Then specific things, graduation rates, post-secondary, who goes to college, how many kids go to college, which ones they go to, how many students get placed in, find jobs, and particularly how many do we help find jobs, if at all? Do we even think about placement for students? We have some programs that provide certificates. Do people get jobs if they earn those certificates? And I think that probably is something that we'd want to follow, particularly with the Career Center, but certainly with the entire high school, the entire pre-K to 12 program. Better relations, better understanding of the preschool situation, number of schools, the slots, the costs. Has there been a preference for school district preschool sites, or are people happy? Are people preferring the private ones, and does that matter? And this is a really broad one, so I put this in red. And a lot of work, a lot of thinking on it is, are we building citizens, or are we building workers, or are we preparing everybody to go to college? Just, broadly, what are we doing? And then reviewing the curricula for relevance, particularly I think around these two big ideas, equity and climate. Impact of COVID, we certainly want to measure that on students with special needs, students that easily excel, and students, minority groups of every makeup. So just how is our work? And I think that is, that is sort of overlaps with this one. What's working in terms of what we're doing with COVID and remote learning in particular for students, parents, staff, and what worked well in the spring, and what's changed, and how do we anticipate it working in the fall? And then the last one is how is each, and this comes again with the implementation data on commitment. How are each school is addressing anti-racist social justice work. So those are the responses that we got. Those are kind of the broad categories. And I think from there, I'm gonna take this down unless we need it again, and just ask for thoughts and comments and some ideas about, do we want to make a priority list? Do we want to, looks like Kelly has a thought. Go ahead, Kelly. Yes, I can. You might want to speak a little louder.
Okay, I'm walking, so I apologize if I sound out of breath or anything. But so, David, I apologize for getting my responses in to you late.
Mm-hmm.
But so none of those were the ones that I put in there. But that's not my comment. My comment is just that I am amazed at the different ideas that people came to. This seems to be a real collaborative effort, just having gotten those different ideas together. So I wanted to say I really appreciated all the different ideas that you just expressed that other people had expressed. So that's all I wanted to say.
Great, thank you. Tim.
Well, first, let me just state the obvious. We're working through a pandemic, and if we can get through the year without a resurgence of cases in the district where the teachers and students and staff are healthy, that's a big deal. At the same time, I'm glad that somebody mentioned keep sight of the larger goals during the crisis, because I do think about the academic side. There's a critical transition from learning to read and then reading to learn. What's going to happen if students, if the curriculum doesn't change to meet these extraordinary circumstances? Are students going to be asked to do more than they're capable of just because they've been passed from one level to another during this enormous crisis? But the most obvious thing is, number one, let's stay healthy. And the district is doing, I think, a great job in doing everything we possibly can with the hybrid model, doing a lot better than some other districts to keep things running. And at the same time, we have other crises. We do have race issues, and we do have a climate crisis, and we do have an imminent budget crisis for the next year. So those are just my wild thoughts, but damn, this is a pandemic, and we're all dealing first and foremost to get through the pandemic.
Thanks, Tim. That is clearly the top and capital letters and bolded and italicized and underlined in terms of our work here. And it's really good to get that really clear and on the top of the list. Other comments or thoughts from the board? Any thoughts about prioritizing or just how do you want to proceed? Emily?
So I wrote down a few things. I guess how I would see prioritizing, I would think like maybe we could look at the list or have discussion about the goals and what things we should be hearing about at each meeting. You know, some of the things obviously rotate on through, but if there is just even a placeholder to hear about things related to certain goal topics, then at least it keeps it on our agenda each time. So maybe that would be the high level goals. And then I see like some of the lower level goals, if we could agree on them, there would be like a rotation through. There might be like, you know, the second meeting of each month, we always try to touch on this, or, you know, every third meeting, or I don't know. It's one way to keep some of these things on our radar. Well, obviously what Tim and everybody has expressed, like we're in a crisis as far as COVID is concerned, but it keeps our mind also on like our larger picture. And then, what did I put here? I can't read my writing. Regular.
Hold it up to the screen, see if we can.
It says regular reports. I mean, I think if we had those three things, if we had the goals that are like the kind of high level things that are on each agenda, we had kind of rotation of certain things, and then regular reporting of data that we thought was really important. And it sounds like a lot of the data people were requesting right now is about COVID and the effectiveness. Those, it would seem then we're hitting on a lot of our broad topics. So I would say those are like three things that I'd love to identify.
Great, that's really helpful, because when Andy and I sit down and probably will invite a few people to come and help us, but when we sit down to try and put this into a calendar, having it thinking about it that way is really helpful. Thank you. Sean. Oops.
Yeah, okay. One of the things that I've sort of thought about for a long time is that the board has specific goals, as you mentioned. I was kind of wondering about minimizing duplication of effort. And that would be actually looking and coordinating with what all the administrators and the central office are planning and working on so hard, so that it would be more of a collaborative effort with the administration to implement all the things that do have to be implemented. A perfect example of that would be all the information that come out of the reopening, and listening to administrators and the superintendent, how all those things are being developed, and then somehow working collaboratively with the administrations. I've gotten a lot of that on the Leadership Council at Guilford, you know, listening carefully to our principal. As we used to on District 6, we'd always get the feedback from 3 administrators at the UHS campus. So that is something that I would like to somehow address.
Thank you. Other thoughts? I guess I didn't give you a clear enough task or establish enough of a goal for the meeting to draw people out. But I wonder if this, sort of lack of conversation is, I'm wondering if it's just because everything, so much is up in the air, and the thing that what Tim mentioned, you know, getting through the year safely is the primary goal in every aspect. And I'm wondering if,
Well, if I may,
go ahead, Tim. Yeah, help me out. I have no idea how to
no,
proceed.
I'm still thinking about what Sean said, which I think is important. You know, this is my first year on the board, so I have nothing to compare it to. But number one, I think that we operate pretty well as a board team, and I think I think we collaborate well with the administration. But I wonder if Sean can mention more, say more about what he means. Should we be doing more with the administration? Should we try to? I don't know. I'll just leave it at that.
Sean, can you maybe say a little bit more about what you meant, at least as far as the COVID information or anything else? Yeah.
I've sort of felt occasionally in the subcommittees that there is a certain amount of duplication of effort. There is some collaboration also, like in the diversity and equity. Michaela comes and she's, you know, it's really good to hear that. You had mentioned the budget development before, and obviously a board can't really single-handedly develop a budget. So we're totally beholden to Frank to show us the path. And Andy would also obviously help, as Lyle did. And you know, we can help guide. We can give like a parameter of things that we want to happen in the budget, what wants to be emphasized. We have to, we're really the board that has to be aware of how our budget impacts taxes. And that's a really good thing, I think, for the board to have up front and center. And then the administration listens to us because we're the boots on the ground. We're the people that pay the taxes, you know, in the district, and we hear how taxes do affect, you know, people's well-being. So it's a balancing, but I think, you know, if we queried the administration more, you know, what would you like from the board for support? What would you like from the board as a leadership? How can we take your ideas and implement them? You know, obviously we already do that. We do the negotiations to some extent for the contracts. So there are all those things. I sort of feel like sometimes the administration could play a bigger collaborative role with the board. So it would take a lot of time, but you know, we do have time.
We do. I'm not sure the administration does these days. Well, let me just go back to the chart and kind of go over some of these things, and maybe we can do one thing we could accomplish is to identify. I mean, it seems clearly we need to. There are 3 or 4 areas where we need to improve communication. So just broadly, we can say, okay, we need to work on these things, and you know, and then maybe figure out which committee. I mean, it would make sense to come up with proposals or thoughts about how to deal with it. The one about the consistent data reports, that kind of gets into what Emily was, to some extent, what Emily was saying about things that we hear about every week, or that we have placeholders, or but we need to develop what that information is. So we need to work separately on that. I'm not sure we can do that all. We'd want to do that all together. So we clearly need to improve communications. We want to keep the things we want to measure, which we didn't include. Actually, I'm going to add it right now, if I can get this to work, is health. And make it nice and red. Nope, that didn't work. Anyway, those are things that we want to measure, and then work with. Again, I'm not sure which committee, or maybe a separate committee to work with the administration to figure out, okay, how can we get data on these? I mean, graduation rates, post-secondary rates, those things are kind of there. But in terms of implementation data on the commitment, I think that's that's something that we want people to be very cognizant of. And even though we haven't got the 90-day plan yet, people are planning curriculum. They've been doing it all, been developing remote curriculum all summer long. And that's something that we should probably have communicated much more effectively too, is just a press release or something about the range of projects that people are doing under the 1% program to develop remote curriculum in case we need it, which apparently we will. But also what was I thinking? Oh, that all of that has social justice or anti-racist components. I think one of the things one of the reasons I wanted to send that NEA report, or the NEA implementation plan, the phased reopening plan, was that was something they focused on. That what was being developed included that awareness, that consciousness. And so how do we get that to happen? How do we get people to be thinking about that? Those are the kinds of things. And then how do we measure or record what's happening? And then clearly the information we want to have about COVID. These are all things that can be worked on separately, and they all come around, they all really revolve around communicating. So in a sense, Sean, you really kind of hit the nail on the head as far as information being in different places, and sometimes two groups or more are working on something similar. Is how do we refine that? And just the last thought on this, and then because I came all the way around to what Andy said when we first talked with him about working with us, was the importance of clear and consistent messages, clear and consistent communication. And that's what we want on these important issues, this big stuff that we want to have measured, is we want clear and consistent messaging. So I don't know what the next step well, Andy's going to bail me out here. Go ahead, Andy.
So I had a question, and you started tapping into it a little bit, David. In terms of the monthly reports that the board would like to see, like what types of information should we be considering that would be helpful to the board? And just kind of the generalized information. I know probably budgetary cash flow reports and enrollment matters, but what else would be helpful and informative that we might be able to pull? Relatively, I would, I'm not going to say without any effort, but something that we have our hands on, that would suffice. Like the health aspect, I'm going to have to sign up, I believe, monthly to the secretary of the AOE, just in terms of numbers of students participating in remote learning versus in-person instruction. So that those health and attendance and those factors would kind of go into things as well. What else would be helpful, I guess, is to give an impression of what's going on in the district.
Well, and so what are people's thoughts about that? That's a really great question. Tim had your hand up a minute ago, and now I don't see it. Did I break your?
No, I didn't want to change the topic from what Andy said, but since tonight is my night to state the obvious, I think for clear and consistent messaging, we need clear and consistent principles. And we can be, one thing that I'm impressed with this board is we make a great effort to make informed decisions. We do look for data to back up our decisions. But all the data in the world doesn't mean a lot if there's not consistent consistent principles to resolve values conflicts. You know, for example, I don't want to get into this, but the issue about the kernels, that's a perfect values conflict. You know, changing the name of a team really raises to a level of discussion what our values are in sports and traditions and all. I don't know if that helps you, Andy, but I think that's where clear and consistent messaging comes from, is really knowing your values and your principles, and everything flows from that.
Thank you, Tim. Kelly?
I guess I'd be interested, and I don't know if this is the appropriate place, time to ask it, but I'd be interested to know if there's been any progress made or any information about the Wi-Fi availability to some students who hadn't previously been able to get that. And I mean, I think it's gonna, depending on how long this remote learning has to happen, it may be a short-term sort of issue, or it might be a longer-term issue. So I'm curious how far that issue has come to some sort of any point of resolution or points of resolution.
Kelly, I think that's something that we're going to want to have a report on. $2 million was just made available for a narrow group of people, but it's a number of our students who it's $3,000 per family support to get the cable companies to run or the internet providers to run a cable into their house. And there also are grants for to pay for this, to help support the service, or pay back service fees so that people can, students and well, students in particular in our case, but also help people that are using telehealth as well. So there's money available, COVID money available for those things. But I think we'll put that on the list of things we want to get information about. I don't know if we want to have an update right now.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it.
Okay. Emily, and then Liz.
So in response to Andy's question about what would a monthly report include? So my thinking would be, because I remember like we used to, on the Brattleboro Town School Board, we used to get monthly reports, and they were more kind of demographic data. And I don't think it was really helpful for making conclusions, although it was a step in the direction of like, we at least had something each month. So what I wrote down, and this would have to be something discussed by the board, is like, I could see it having three things. One is, the first thing would be like some specific COVID measures that we're tracking, right? Like if we're saying like, okay, maybe we'll do such an amazing job that would be like everything, actually we're at like, you know, 80% of the students are in school and they're, you know, there's been 0 incidents, or I don't know, it could be very simple measures that we're tracking for COVID, or for just the health of the schools. And that could be across this year, we decide that that's going to be a priority. And like the second, I would say like, if health is one priority, which it seems like it's going to be, the second one would be something that we've all agreed on, maybe the anti-racist agenda. We said that we were going to have measures that we were tracking across time. Now, I know there's committees working on that. I know the administration's working on that, but that was a massive agenda. So it would seem that there would be data that would be decided that you were collecting, and each month there would be a monthly progress update on that. And if that was kind of the big agenda item that we were choosing for this year, then that would come second. So you'd see like COVID or health, you'd have this, the board's kind of prime target of hearing about, and then maybe a rotating smaller portion. This is only once a month report, and it can just be high level, but like rotating, I could imagine something that September, we hear a little data update on preschools, you know, in the district. In October, we hear an update on school discipline. I mean, we had a huge agenda around school discipline and social emotional learning in past, which we were hearing randomly about, but this would be a formalized thing we kind of agreed to that's the month's focus. So any data around that we'd like to hear about, just so that we're kind of having this regular rotation. So that's how I imagine it. I don't know. I mean, we did actually on the Programmatic and Performance Equity Committee, we did last year hear about all the different data that's being collected. So it seems like there's a ton. So it should be, some of these would be new data, like the anti-racist agenda. A lot of that is like new data sets that you would be evolving, but some of the rotating monthly topics like school discipline, those things are already being collected. So that's how I envision it happening. And it would be like, you know, your admin report once a month, and then we could ask questions about it and just stay up to date. But maybe other people have different ideas.
Well, I think about that third item, that could align with whatever's being presented too. If we have a kind of a monthly informational piece that we're presenting upon, that could be the component of the third. So there's a connection to why we're reporting this. This is the data in terms of where we are with these items. And now we're going to kind of do a deeper dive into what this all is. If that would be kind of a helpful way to kind of align the calendar of things as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think this is kind of what I was hoping we'd get. It seems like we're sort of putting a structure around our meetings and around agenda setting. So if we can keep going in this direction, that'd be great. Liz, and then Michelle, and then Sean.
Well, I'm not quite going in that direction. I had emailed Andy today, and since we had so much trouble last year getting people hooked up to the internet, VTEL can reach some of them, as can Consolidated Communications. Now, Consolidated Communications requires a landline, but for kids who are, you know, pretty far out, who like VTEL or Comcast isn't serving, that might be a solution for them. And I had actually emailed Andy today and wondered if there was money in the CARES Act for getting kids connected and maybe paying the bill up front and getting it done now instead of waiting until we, you know, because Comcast is just merged with somebody else and they're all over the place right now. But doing that up front and getting it out of the way and getting all the COVID money we can for it.
Yeah, there is COVID money in a bunch of different buckets, and that is underway. People are working on that from the state, and I don't have the specifics, and I don't want to go into them right now and get off of the work we're doing tonight, but I will want to look into that very soon, because if we're not hooked up by the time we start school, then we've missed that opportunity. So,
and the other,
Michelle? Oh, go ahead, Liz.
David?
Yeah.
There are so many items on here that all go back to the document we signed, that I think it's pretty important to get that into policy sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I'm going to ask Alyssa again. I'm going to see if we can't stay on the topic of focusing on the things that we want to get into the meeting reports, because we definitely will be looking at getting a policy on the commitment too. So Michelle, and then Sean.
Okay. So I guess my thoughts, I understand that we're kind of talking about data to look at and things like that right now. And it's funny because the sort of three things I jotted down that stood out to me, it sort of is all encompassing in a way, because it's hard to know what to contribute to this conversation, because first year board member, and there's a lot to learn and to know what's available. And that goes a little bit to board development, which is probably one of the first things that seemed important to me. I know when I came on, you know, I was told there'll be an orientation, an opportunity to meet administrators and learn about the programs and the different committees and the different, you know, who's contributing to make our schools function as they do. And without that knowledge, I'm so appreciative of all of the expertise and experience that sits here in this space as well. It's wonderful, but it does, there's definitely, I'm sure I'm not completely alone, but there's just so much more to learn and understand to be able to be my best and to contribute as much as I could. And so when I think about this kind of issue of communication and what information do we want shared, I don't have a clear answer, because I don't know what I should be asking for. But one thing that does kind of stand out, and that maybe because we were just talking about this yesterday, we finally had a communication committee meeting, is just the need to have feedback from our parents and educators included in this. And we were kind of brainstorming ways to do that, but I'm not really sure how we can measure. I mean, that is great. It tells us, gives us lots of answers in like a very black and white way, but I do feel like we need to be tapping in to the feedback of our community and our educators making everything go round to really fully see the big picture and be able to measure our success and our needs and make sure that we're hitting on all the points that are being looked for. And maybe that has a little bit to do with leadership council development because this is still in the process. I think pretty clear that there's a lot of reorganizing that needs to happen since this is now a merged district to like really be one unit. But yeah, that's about it.
Thanks, Michelle. And I think you described the situation really well. Unfortunately, the best laid plans went right out the window at the middle of March. Thanks. Sean?
Yeah, I'm just sort of thinking about all of this COVID stuff from a student's perspective. So all the students from pre-K to 12. And that's why I included in my little box to see how would we would reclaim all the things that we no longer are able to do, like the sports, the drama, the foreign travel, all those things, the art shows, musicals. So I was sort of thinking, and this goes back to what Andy asked, if we had, it would be kind of sad to do it, but if we had all of the losses that have incurred because of the COVID, all the lost opportunity for all the students, which are, you know, I think back, if this was my son's junior, senior year in high school, and the sports was taken away from him, it'd be very difficult. It'd be a very, very heartfelt thing for him to go through. It was very, very important to him. And my daughter the same way with the Dial magazine and the extemporum newspaper at the high school. So if maybe it would help to categorize what we can no longer do and then try to see from that list how we could augment it with things that we can do, things that we are doing. And because I think the bottom line is, the most important thing is to make sure that the students that are in school right now and have the impact of the COVID disaster, really, what they've lost and then if they could see, oh yeah, that it's compensatory, we can do this now, and this makes up for the loss that we're experiencing. It might be a difficult thing because I think we have lost a lot, but it would be educational for the parents, for the students, and the teachers to look at what we've lost and what we have gained, and maybe not balance them, but just observe them. So.
Thank you, Sean. That's a really good point, especially for the whole community to understand that, you know, the extent of what has been lost, but also the effort that's gone. I mentioned earlier the 1% research or curriculum development, remote learning curriculum development that's being developed, and the anti-racist social justice thing. Those things are being developed really aggressively because of the pressure of being able to do it well. And another example is these meetings, so many more people being able to participate. There are the ways that we are accommodating or supplementing are actually having some positive outcomes. I don't think they're going to outweigh the initial list of lost opportunities, but it's hopeful. And it also makes it clear to parents in the community that the kids coming back to school, it's not going to be some wasteland, and it's definitely not going to be like it was in the spring where it was an emergency switchover and people made do with what they could create with incredible effort. This is going to be much better planned and much better constructed. And the same true, not alone in curriculum, but also in terms of safety measures and precautions. Those are things that we should be pointing out, we've lost a lot of privacy, we've lost a lot of freedom of movement. At the same time, look at these things that we're putting in place to make sure that everybody is going to be safe. So that's a really, really good point, Sean. Other thoughts or comments or things that we want to make sure, well, specifically in terms of reports from the administration at every meeting, but any other things that you want to make sure we get to, any other thoughts, period. Andy, go ahead.
So, in addition to that, and I've toyed with the idea of wanting to keep the board in the loop with things, and I've given you some periodic updates. Is that more helpful, and to have a shorter piece of information? I'm not sure, and I think in the past probably a board packet was created with documents from the different schools.
No.
Like I would think that would be, so the goal is to make sure that feedback loop is constantly moving. What type of updates do you want, on a regular basis, and do you want them weekly? Do you want them bi-weekly, monthly? Like that's the, in terms of structure and how we're communicating and informing you, I'd like to try to stay, I'd like to stay ahead of things as much as we can. So if we know, okay, by Friday morning, we're providing the board with an update or whatever day, I can then map my week out to make sure that I'm retrieving information from people to continue to keep the board in the loop. And again, the last thing I want for anyone on the board to feel is, cornered at Hannaford's or at the co-op trying to, shop for vegetables or for produce, and you're stuck with a conversation you can't answer. So like, how frequently do you want to hear from me? And I know, Michelle, you want to hear from me probably daily.
Yeah, I'm with
everything all the time.
Yeah, I'm with Michelle. Yeah, I'm with Michelle, but I know that some of us, we don't look at our school district email every day, every morning, or several times a day, and or maybe every week even, because there's not a lot in there. But I think that, well, Tim's gonna. I would actually like to hear from everybody in terms of what really would work effectively and what really would fit your goals. My feeling is that there's no such thing as too much, and it's easy. I'd rather have too much than not have it. So Tim, go ahead.
I don't know how communication has been with teachers, but I'd like to know what's happening with faculty development. They if they're meeting their faculty development goals, whether a more efficient method would be just to hear indirectly from the teachers union or the principals or the administration. But how can we best support our faculty who are facing unique, enormous challenges?
Tim, do you mean that in terms of ongoing development and professional development plans and licensing renewal things, or do you mean that in terms of like right now developing the things that we need to get the year started?
No, I mean right now I hope there'll be meeting once a week and talking about how they're adjusting to the hybrid model and to everything, and just to hear how, from the teacher's perspective, how things are going in the classroom and what they need and how we can best support them.
Great, yeah, and how those Wednesday
right
worked? Yeah, that's a really good idea. Other thoughts? Anne, hi.
Hi. A specific request made last year by the Equity and Diversity Committee was that discipline be tracked by marginalized status, both racially and by socioeconomic status. That information has not exactly been forthcoming, but I would like to see any information that is supplied to us in a report broken down by those standards. So if we're talking about scores, I want to know about marginalized students. If we're talking about office referrals or planning/resource room referrals, I want to know about those by race. If we're starting a new program, I want to know about that as well. So any of our statistics that can be put through a lens of racial and socioeconomic and otherwise marginalized view, I would like to see all of it that way. I mean, not a lot we can say about a budget report unless we're spending it on diversity and equity programming.
Thanks, Ann. One of the things I know you're aware of, and I just want to state it really openly, is that in a lot of cases, because we have small numbers of one particular demographic or another, that can't be public. But that doesn't mean that we can't get that information. We just have to create the structure around the confidentiality to be able to get that information. So I just wanted to add that to what you said. That's a great great expansion of what we want in terms of regular information and important information. Emily?
Okay, lower hand. So as far as what Andy asked about, like how often would be sufficient, you know, I'm not the person actually who needs every single little detail, but I guess in my big picture thinking, I would think one time a month I would get some kind of data dump, right? Like this bigger report that we're talking about. I mean, it doesn't have to be overly formalized, like stylized or something, but like on the measures we've all agreed for the year. I would love to see something, actually what Tim said reminded me of, so my background's in labor management community collaboration. And so like we used to work with massive districts like Boston, kind of getting the school boards, teachers unions, and superintendents to form collaborative, high-level strategic teams. And we saw a lot of benefit to that. So I would love to see something where once a month we get some kind of data dump, which mainly comes from you, from all, you know, you've gathered from everybody. So it, you know, it would be a collaborative effort. But I'd love to see something where once a month we do actually hear something from teachers. So maybe that would be that once a month the president of a teachers union joins our meeting and just shares out, you know, something on one of the big topics we're thinking about or you're working with them on. It would just be nice to have some type of representative from the teachers groups be at our meeting once in a while. And then I see, like, I do think last year we had the luxury, because we were in person, of rotating through the schools and we could see each school site or at least be in the building. So maybe in place of that, a bi-weekly, you know, at every meeting, we would have 2 schools share out. So that would be up to Andy to figure out who's, you know, kind of, is there something big going on at, let's say, Putney or Guilford that, like, you know, we could highlight this week. And then just hearing from that principal, I don't necessarily need like a, you know, a paragraph from them, but it could just be that it's like, keep it under 5 minutes, share out something that's kind of like, you know, you're really proud of in your school, in whatever way they see fit. But at least then every 2.5 months, we'd hear from every school. Because we won't have this in-person, this luxury of being in person and feeling like connected to that school site at this moment.
Thanks, Em. We've got lots of good ideas now. I've got a half a page here. Other specifics about things that, I mean, we know from the chart the major topics that we want to focus on. Other specifics, Sean.
Well, I would just follow up on what Emily just said, and that would be the you know, the role of the leadership council. My experience, and Liz has been to quite a good number of Guilford leadership council meetings. There's another one this Friday at 1 o'clock. So that's a really good resource to get a snapshot of what's happening in a specific school. I've only done Guilford, but you know, that since they're all virtual, it actually is a pretty good opportunity.
Yeah, combining those instead of having a whole, like, you know, maybe 2 every month, 2 of those 2 or 3 of the leadership councils would do a more in-depth report than just we met. Yeah, great. Kelly and then Andy.
So I'm not sure how or even if this could sort of be reduced to like a report, but I'm concerned about and interested in how students, like any kind of academic loss that students maybe suffered from during the springtime, and is there some effort or information about how that's the attempts to overcome that, or trying to not let that be an issue in this coming semester? Does any of that make sense?
Oh, yeah.
Yep.
Andy, you want to respond to that, and whatever it was you wanted to say?
Yeah, and so I think we would look at that through some of the benchmark testing that's done on students. And so once we assess numeracy and literacy, we're going to hold off on doing those assessments until probably October, but we could do some relative comparison if we're using the same tools from one year to the next. We can try to get some level of analysis in terms of where they were, to get a handle on that. That will at least give us some indicator for that. It's not going to hit those students that are new to us or students that have just moved in or our youngest kids, but we should be able to get some idea of what that looks like. We don't want to pressure the gap, pressure teachers or families or students about that gap in learning, because we know it's going to exist. But I think your second part of that is like, what are we going to do about it, is probably the more critical aspect of this.
Yeah, I didn't mean it to be like, oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, no, go ahead.
I didn't mean it to be like a pressure as in bad students, bad teachers, but I guess more through the focus of how can we use this, we know this, and how can we use this to help pull the students back up?
Absolutely. I think the intent to wait until October to get that is so that students are just comfortable back in the environment. But then but like what you said, let's and then to create kind of a safe environment so we can have that conversation about, okay, what are we doing now to kind of elevate people? Sean said something that made me, and maybe when we talked about the leadership councils, and I was thinking about something Michelle said regarding to some of the different ways that the leadership councils are running or need to reformulate. Is there a thought that there might need to be some kind of district-wide calibration in terms of in bringing all the groups together to have some sort of growth and development work with that in terms of what the leadership councils do or how they run and the format for them, so that when the groups talk, they're using at least the same format, or they're talking the same language, and they understand what the distinct roles are?
That's going to be, that's actually on our agenda for, if not the next meeting, the one after it, to talk about that and to look at the policy and figure out how to approach it. That's a great, I hadn't even thought about having sort of a joint process and identify some common approaches. But certainly for parents and for teachers, administrators, and board members, there really are specific groups in these teams.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be fully transparent. Guilford is the only leadership council I've attended, but it's a great group, and it really accomplishes quite a bit. And there's such a level of engagement and involvement. It would be nice to kind of capture that and have that same experience, at all of the different schools, because the feedback and the information is incredibly helpful.
Michelle, and then Tim.
I was just going to say, well, in regards to the leadership council development, that was something that the communication committee yesterday had organized and wanted to find the right way to recommend that there be a district-wide call to bring them together to just clarify the role that they have. I think there's some of the councils have just developed, like literally in the last 2 months, and I think there's just a lack of guidance on what their role is and how they might facilitate that and be the voice of their school and be the community communication. So I think that would be wonderful. That'd be awesome. In regards to our talking about getting educator feedback, I would just want to suggest that maybe we I guess I'd like to have our teachers be able to decide how that voice is represented. I know in theory, having someone that represents the union would be a great voice. But I just think for the sake of being transparent and accountable, I'd almost like to see a leadership council for the teachers where they get to choose their own representation, that there's a process where, you know, they know that someone from their school or several voices are coming together and we're getting direct feedback without a middleman that's kind of condensing something and speaking for everybody. And I think that they would probably welcome being asked how to do that and contribute.
Yeah, I think there are two middlemen. One is the administrators choosing teachers to come, and also the union choosing people to come. And neither of those are, I mean, they represent the staff, they represent the teachers in different ways, but they're not sort of them. And I don't know what other model or what other method we could use, but we can talk about the two. Having people report about the 1% work that they did is a great way to get a whole range of people, or to have a topic and then people that have distinguished themselves, like if it's social justice, having people that have really focused on that come, or those teacher leaders, hearing from them would be terrific. Thank you. That's a great idea. Tim and then Liz.
That is a really nice idea. Whoops. Yeah, I'm unmuted. Are we going to have another student representative on the board?
I think we will at some point, yeah, once we have students again.
Okay.
Liz?
Yeah, about the teachers, I think that the teachers themselves should be the ones who choose to give feedback to the board without any involvement from the administration. And then that clears out any, possible, it makes it much more transparent because no administrator has chosen, this teacher over that teacher. So your teacher leader idea is good if they're willing to do it, but I would prefer that the administration have no say in which teachers get to come back to the board to let us know how things are going. I think it's too many layers, and it's also possible that an administrator would pick teachers who are going to reflect well on that administrator, and that might not be what is really happening in that school. So I want them to be heard without being pre-screened by administration. I think that's really important.
Yeah, clearly, I think what we were trying to talk about, I think, is how to identify them not related to the union or from the administration. Yep. And the reason, and the specific, the diversity, let me think now. The staff diversity teams, the teachers on those are supposed to, according to the commitment, there are people who have had demonstrated a commitment and experience in those areas. So that is a different categorization. But yeah, there may be, just to have a teacher meetings and say who wants to come up and talk to the board this month about what they're doing. But again, yeah, something to figure out. Thanks, Liz. Emily and then Sean.
So two things. One is about what Tim had said about the students. So I love the idea of the student council reps being at the meetings. I would say though, in the past year, I don't know how invigorating the meetings have been for the student council reps. And it seemed to me in a lot of the meetings, there was no role for them. It just felt like, I don't know, it didn't feel like it functioned. It was a great idea, but I think we can improve on the actual implementation of it. Would be my suggestion, so that it feels really meaningful to them, or that they're participating in a certain conversation that we're scheduling at a certain time that we want student feedback on, so that they could prep, because otherwise it was kind of like they just sat there for an hour and then scooted out. So I'd say I'd like to see that. Maybe we re-envision how we do it. Second thing about the teachers, I'm fine with, a lot of the things people had suggested about getting some from the teacher, the leadership councils, or whatever way that we go about that. But I would say that I'd love to start to re-envision a little bit, and I don't know, I'm not on the personnel committee, but the teachers union oftentimes gets kind of like pushed into the realm of this is like a contract thing. And we don't really work with them other than that. And I'd love to think about them more as a policy partner. I think that's important. And I think they are actually elected from the other teachers. I mean, like if teachers didn't want those people elected, then they wouldn't have picked them. So it does seem like there might be some sort of role for them if they also wanted to collaborate or be involved in certain conversations. I just wouldn't, I think oftentimes we throw them out because we're like, oh, it's like this formalized contract negotiating thing, and that's kind of a pain, and we're not going to deal with them in a different way. But I'd say like maybe we re-envision a little bit because they are actually at the top tier of the teacher structure. So, I don't know those people personally, but just something to think about.
Thanks, Em. Sean?
Yeah, just to follow up on that a little bit, at the District 6 level, we had something called the Teacher Curriculum Committee. And then the Teacher Curriculum Committee was responsible for making sure that the 1% funds were avoided, just taken on in a responsible way with a good application and everything. And then we'd have feedback. And I think it was one of the good ideas I had at some point for the Teacher Curriculum Committee to actually go to the room of the teachers, and then the teacher would give a report on what they did for the 1% proposal. So I can remember going to Stephen Rice, Michelle Hood, Dan Braden, and some people in the math department. I don't remember their names, but it was just it was such a real solid connection to, okay, this is what they're doing, this is how they perform in the classroom, and it was actually pretty exciting. One time we went and had a presentation on in the computer lab at the high school, and it was just awesome. It was just to see all the equipment and the influence. The kids were there, the students were there actually doing the work, and so it was a real connection to and nuts and bolts of education, which I miss because of the Zoom and because we don't really have the way to connect to the students and the teachers.
So that's a multifaceted way to, I love that idea, but primarily because we could, having people come in and talk about, at this point, having people come in and talk about the work they did in 1% relates directly to what's going to be happening in terms of remote learning. Here's the way this is going to be different. Here's the way this is going to work for people that really have no idea what that's going to mean. They just know what they saw last spring, and hope it's better. But well, we know these staff and we know the kind of work that they do. So, we're already impressed without even seeing it. But it'd be great for the public to see that as well.
As a follow-up, I wonder if it would be possible to have a teacher who is doing a 1% proposal actually go to the room where they do the work and be in the room with a Zoom and presenting to the board, because it's kind of exciting to see the actual room, to actually sit in the room, or now to be virtually in the room and actually observe what's been developed with a 1% fund is pretty cool.
Yeah, I think we ought to, whatever else happens, I think we ought to try and get a couple of those scheduled for our August 19th meeting, and have a couple of those. And it's just, it's easy to Zoom. It's easy to get into a room with a Zoom meeting. Thank you. Any other thoughts? All right, we've got a really nice long list of ideas. I've been writing them down, Andy. I suspect you are too. And we've got BCTV is taping this, so we can always go back and look as well. But we've got a really good start. In fact, overwhelming start. We're going to have much longer meetings. But I think that these meetings, these ideas are really a refinement. It sort of shows that we've been doing this for a while now, because these are really a refinement of the way we started and the things that we started doing. And when it was just a matter of even, I mean, I can't even think of how basic the beginnings were in terms of how we would function, what we'd be doing. And we're really getting, I think, a lot more meaning and a lot more meat here. And I don't want to keep singling Tim out, but pointing out I'm really grateful that you pointed out that the number one goal and the thing that's got to be at the top of the list is what are we doing? How are we doing as far as staying healthy? So other thoughts, and we can move on to other thoughts about anything. Kelly, go ahead.
So I don't know if this is appropriate here, and I don't expect an answer to it, but I did put in my questions. I'm curious about how, like, the budget that we passed, how is that being affected by are we having some sports, no sports? And how is the budget before those decisions were made? How is it being affected by that? And if that's something that's not appropriate for now, if Andy can just sort of look at that, and I'm sure I did not say it right.
I think we know what, I think we do know what you asked. And I don't know if Andy, there are some things I think you're probably comfortable talking about. It'd be great to have Frank, who would be more on top of the most recent developments, but I don't know if we've received checks yet, reimbursements for our expenses in the spring, but any information you've got, and that we will have meeting updates at every meeting in terms of what are we receiving, what are we getting reimbursed for, what's it doing to our what's the effect on our 2021 budget. We'll be getting those regularly, but
and that's fine. It's fine if that information isn't available to us now. I just wanted to put that question out there.
Yeah, great. I hope some of it is. Andy, is there anything you can tell us at this point?
I can't really say much about the budget. I know that the ESSER funds have been made available in terms of what that looks like, but that's kind of from what Frank said at the last meeting. It's kind of a wash. The ESSER funds are going to come out of it's whatever spent with ESSER funds will come straight out of the ed fund itself.
So they're just replacing what money we would normally get with this emergency money from the Fed, so that don't have to spend quite so much. But the CRF money is different.
That's different, and that's being worked upon. So I think maybe it might be helpful to have Frank really talk more about that. And then with regards to sports, we're told we're going to get guidance soon. I haven't seen it come by yet, but I may have missed it in an email. But I haven't heard anything about sports yet in terms of what the VPA is going to suggest.
That would get published. That would be publicly known, broadly known, really quickly. They would promise that in September or in July.
I can say, in seeing the news today, the University of Connecticut's football team will not be playing this year. They've canceled their season. It's probably a good thing that they did that anyways for their sake, because I don't know if they were to win a game, but I was a UConn student, so I can say that. I would anticipate seeing some of that news about the sports programs coming out shortly, because schools have got to start thinking about fall practices and when they return to sports. So people have to make plans.
And we haven't had at least any contracts for coaches yet, have we?
No,
I haven't seen that lesson. Yeah, great. Any other questions? I would say any other questions about anything. Well, I'm feeling like we've got really a lot to work with here, and just developing a report and getting it out to the board, I think, is going to be a really large step forward and a really good effort to focus and be really clear on the kinds of information that we want to receive. I'm sure we'll be adding things as we go along and maybe pushing things aside too. But I'm feeling like we've got a lot on the list now, and I'd like to get to work sort of figuring out how we're going to structurally put it together. So I'm asking if are there any other thoughts about this or anything else about our work, our goals or our reflections on what we've been doing, just any comments whatsoever. Sean?
Yeah, this might be a little tangential, but I'll throw it out there anyway. On July 21st, I attended the VSBA, VSA Educational Equity. It was the whole presentation by the VSA. And there was a keynote speaker, Virginia Jacobs, and she is an educational equity advocate. And I think it's still available online, but it was pretty amazing to hear a person who doesn't really have much information about Vermont and her take on positive and negative aspects of Vermont from a teacher educational viewpoint. I found it really, really interesting. It was like she's holding up a mirror for us, and not always polished. So it was pretty interesting. A lot of statistics, but it was very interesting to hear her take. So I think Andy was the one that made that available, and I was able to at least get the keynote speech. So maybe,
Yeah.
do you have any more to say about that, Andy?
Yeah, I thought it was an interesting talk, and it really is when you have someone kind of looking in, and they're applying their research and their background and looking at what the demographics happen to be. It was kind of a really unique presentation that was I thought helpful, and then still set some parameters for what we have to do better.
Is that posted on the superintendent or the school board's websites? Is it available to view?
I was going to go back and I think I found it, but I haven't had time to go back and open it yet.
Yeah. Well, if you do, share it. Yeah, send it out.
Okay. I'll send it to you, David.
Yeah, and I'll get it out to everybody. Great, thank you.
Okay, I downloaded the slides from the presentations that the keynote speaker and then the breakout group. I downloaded all the slides, so I have those if it's not up on YouTube or whatever.
Yeah, if you want to send it to me, I'll distribute them around. I mean, I imagine the statistics around, a lot of the statistics are on the slide that could be enlightening as well. Great, thanks. Other thoughts or comments or ideas or things that we need to talk about while we're not doing regular business and just need to talk about our work? Anything been sort of stuck in the back of someone's mind? Or I think you raised your hand again, Liz. No, not on purpose.
No, I did.
Oh, okay.
And it isn't what you asked, but I wanted to go back to people talking about kids making up learning.
Mhm.
And what I was thinking is for 7th grade and down, the learning doesn't all have to be made up this year. It could be spread over like a 2-year period if need be. I don't think there's any reason to pressure kids. And it may actually be easier for kids to make up that lost learning because we have shoved curriculum back 2 years. In 35 years, we've shoved curriculum back 2 full years. So just because we can teach kids the alphabet and letter sounds in pre-K doesn't mean it's the optimal time to do it. So, I think the kids might wind up surprising people, and that I don't think any teacher should be, or kid should be pressured if they're, you know, not making it all up in 1 year, to think about it over a 2-year period. But I also know that, you know, from back then till now, kids were, you know, doing great through the schools. And it seems like ever since we got to No Child Left Behind, when I had to test 4-year-olds to meet the criteria for Head Start, it became really obvious to me. Even since then, it's been at least 6 to 9 months have been shoved backwards onto 4-year-olds. So I think that's something that's not very well known, but it should be out there. People should know that. You know, my oldest was in kindergarten in 1984. They learned the alphabet and letter sounds. And yet those kids went through school fine. And they got into good colleges, and they, you know, whatever. So, you know, I'm not asking everybody to go back to that, but I'm just saying that they didn't seem to have the difficulties that kids have now. I guess I want to put it that way. That kids now are having more trouble than they had back then. So it's something to keep in the back of your mind when we think about kids and testing and this, that, and the other.
Thanks, Liz. I think one thing for sure, that when we talk about the first 6 weeks at least being really heavily focused on social and emotional work, that's an indication of an awareness that putting pressure on kids, it could have the effect of re-traumatizing them when we're trying to reacclimate them to being in school like this. So I think there's a really broad awareness of that. It's going to be an interesting process to see how we make up for this time, because it's going to be different for every kid. It's going to force us into individualizing even more than we already try to do, which is, I think, is a hopefully positive outcome. Other comments? I don't want to volunteer anybody, but we haven't heard from Thomas. I know what your primary concerns are, and they are at the front, or at least a couple of them, and they are, I guess they would be primary if you had 2 of them. But I know the things you're really concerned with, and they're right at the top of the list. But it'd be nice to hear, since you're a pretty new board member, along with Michelle, kind of maybe one meeting with all of us, and then this stuff. So I'd love to hear your even comments about the meeting, never mind the topics and everything.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people covered my thoughts, and I don't really have anything great to add. But Tim's focusing us in the beginning was a good thing to remind me that if we get through this with everyone happy and healthy, that's a big success.
Yeah.
The only thing I can add to that is we might have in the back of our mind not to be too ambitious on our goals, because we're afraid of, maybe not paying enough attention to the elephant in the room. But we should try our best to do the big things and the little things.
Thank you. Yeah, I think there are a couple other people that are really cognizant of that as well, so you won't be the only one reminding us to not lose sight. Thank you. Other thoughts or comments? Anything that's been in the back of your mind for the last few months? Or
are we in danger of having a meeting that's less than 3 hours?
I don't think we have any. I don't think that's ever going to happen again. We're going to invite the public in now, and that could start a whole other hour and a half. But I would like to, if any of our public viewers, thanks for coming, and thanks for your patience. And if you have any comments or questions, again, we're not really doing business, so questions, specific questions about planning or updates or anything like that, I think either direct them to me or the superintendent, or our next meeting we'll be getting on the 19th. We'll be getting full updates on everything that's going on, more than you can imagine. But I just welcome your comments at this point, or questions if you have any. Hmm. Well, I guess we wowed them. Oh, wait, here we go. Tara.
Sorry, I was trying to figure out how to unmute myself for a second.
You got
I
it.
just wanted to say thank you so much for allowing us to listen in tonight and to really see some insight into the personalities on the new board and the direction for the board as we deal with all of this COVID issues of sending our children back to school. And I think it's really important to see such thoughtful process going into the decision making of what's happening in our schools. As a parent listening in on the reporting, it'd be really great if some of that reporting can be in a function that parents can see as a way of reviewing not only our own school, but also interacting with other schools and learning about those other schools as we move forward in this unified district. And I would have to agree to some of the comments made early on about really just we're in a pandemic and just getting our students through it is one of the biggest challenges that we all face. And as a working parent during this time and thinking about going back to school, it is important for me to keep everyone safe and sound. And that's not only my students, but the teachers that are in school. And I hope that the administration and the board is listening to what the teachers are saying and the kids are feeling on going back to school. And so that's all I wanted to say, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Tara. Any other comments or thoughts? I think I would ask Vice Chair Beekman to take us out.
Mr. Chairman, there being no actual business before this board, I move that we adjourn.
Second.
Second.
Thank you, Liz. It's been moved and seconded that we adjourn at 7:35. All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
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 Thank you all, and good night. Stay healthy and cool.
You too, David. Thanks.
Thanks.
Thanks, David.
Bye, everybody.
Aye.